beat. Teen Speak. Back to another episode of Teen Speak. As you may tell, we have rearranged our room a little bit.
Look at this.
Hopefully it looks a little different. Now Dawson is within striking reach if I need to.
Great.
Excited. So I'm excited. Jeremy got himself a milkshake from the Cockroach restaurant. So he's excited. Has a little extra flavor in it, he said. I wonder why. Yeah. So
good protein.
We won't name the place. We got a lot to talk about today. We're going to be back in Hebrews chapter 11, Dawson. But before we do that, we also want to give you a little heads up. We're also going to be talking about the Black Widow movie that came out this past Friday.
Oh, yes.
We're excited about it. So I'm giving you all the heads up now. After we close out, we're going to close out like normal. And then after that, we will go into a time where we talk about the Black Widow, give our thoughts on it. So for those of you that haven't seen it yet, don't worry. It won't be until after the closing.
Yes.
So you'll have plenty of time
because we care about everyone.
to exit. Okay. All right. So let's get back into it. Good job, Dawson. Way to be awkward.
Thank you.
All right. So now we are in Hebrews chapter 11 still. We've been there for the past several weeks.
Yep.
And we are now down to a man by the name of Abraham, or for those of you that sing all your nursery songs, Father Abraham. Yeah. Father Abraham. So let's go ahead, look down at verse 8. It says here, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. And then here's a second thing that he did as well. By faith he sojourned in a land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the promise of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker was God. Pretty interesting story here that it talks about with Abraham, Dawson. The first thing that I see here that really draws my attention is it says that Abraham, in verse 8, it said he was called out to go to a place, and he didn't even know where he was going.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is phenomenal. And it talks about this thing we still talk about today, taking that leap of faith or stepping out in faith and trusting God. You know, sometimes there are going to come moments in our life where we feel like we don't understand the next step. We don't know where we're going.
Exactly.
But we can see here that Abraham was a man that was described as having great faith because he stepped out.
Yes. Like for me, well, let's go back and let's not forget where Abraham, what the story and where the story was. All right. So Abraham, his entire family, and everything he ever knew was in Ur.
Ur.
You can spell that E-R-I-R-U-R. I don't care. Ur. And that's where he's lived there almost his whole life. His father was there. Probably his whole ancestry's been there. And so he's comfortable. This is a comfortable place. This was his home where he lived. And God calls him to go somewhere else.
Yeah. And it's not like it's a completely different country, a completely different land, an unknown place for him. You know, it's not like he had relatives or people there that he knew. It wasn't like Sarah was from there. This is a completely new place for him. And, you know, sometimes you're going to be faced with the same decision in your life. Sometimes there are going to be situations in your life where you're going to look at it and be like, man, this just does not make sense to me. I do not understand what the next step is. I don't see the end goal of this. I know God's calling me here, but I don't know anything about this place. For me, that's kind of how it was coming here. I didn't know anyone here. Miss Jackie, the only people we knew here was Pastor and Miss Shay. Yeah, and the rest was just stepping out and just trusting that God's gonna lead. He's gonna guide and provide for us, and that's really what Abraham believed. He believed that wherever God guided, he provided. And I also see here in verse 9 it tells us he really didn't have it that easy. It says here, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob. Now, what's interesting to me about that is that he says he dwelt in tabernacles. Now, for those of you that don't know, back in the day, a tabernacle was just like a tent. It was a mobile place of living. So he didn't even have a permanent or even semi-permanent place to live. He lived in a tent.
It was like your trailer house back then, pretty much, right?
Similar. It'd be like I guess tents aren't even used today. People, they call it now. I've heard several of my students tell me they call it glamping now. So
Glamping?
Yeah, it's glamorous camping. So glamping.
I gotta catch up.
Anyway, it wasn't like that. There was no AC in these tents. There was no running water, no electricity. I mean, it's just, very
No Wi-Fi.
primitive way of living.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I've stayed in camps before. I know what it's like to stay in a tent. Sorry, not a camp. In a tent. But I will tell you, I don't know how I would do it without an air mattress or a sleeping bag.
Oh.
And I believe, I've never gone so deep to research the flooring, but I could even imagine it was probably just literally something to cover them, nothing really on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
So sleeping with the critters. But why did he do this? Abraham left this place where God called him. He sojourned in the land of promise as in a strange country, meaning he never made it his permanent home, dwelling in tabernacles with his sons, Isaac and Jacob. And then it says, the heirs with him of the same promise, the promise that God gave Abraham. And why did he do that? For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God.
Wow.
Abraham here wasn't settling for anything less than where God was. He was determined. I find it interesting. When Abraham talked to Lot, Lot had the option, and Lot chose the glorious and the well-watered plains of Sodom and Gomorrah. But Abraham still was not pleased. He stayed in tents and looked for where God was and God's blessing was. And listen, guys, there's going to come times in your life when you're not going to understand. You're not going to see the next step. You're not going to understand how you're going to make it through the next week or the next day or even the next month, next year. But what you need to do in your life is look for a place where you see God in it. Look for a place where you know God resides there, where
That's
God
good.
is blessing you there, where God's presence is going to be there. Because listen, the comforts of this world, living in the place with his family, his culture, all of that can change. But as long as you have God, you know that, as my grandparents used to say, where God guides, God provides. So you can always trust, like Abraham did, that when you're following God, ultimately he will take you where you need to go. He'll provide everything for you, and he will be your sustainer.
That's good.
So Abraham was a man of great faith. Next week, we're actually going to start talking about his wife, Sarah. So I'm excited about that. But I'm going to go ahead and close it out here for our normal listeners. Dawson, do you got a question for our...
I have a question for commenters. This is not the Black Widow part. Let me just warn. We'll tell you when we end and we get to that. So for questions for commenters, this week I was hanging out with buddies, and Thursday night we all went to Dairy Queen, and on the way there we were listening to some good gospel songs, old gospel songs.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for today is, what is your favorite old time gospel hymn?
That's a good question.
What is yours, Coach?
Oh, it depends. Now, when you're talking about hymn, you're talking about out of the hymn book? Or
Or any old song.
I'll use out of the hymn book
Okay.
to make it more fair. My favorite hymnal would have to be, that one's more of a praise and worship. It's in hymnals. My favorite song would be As the Deer. Those are found in a lot of hymnals. I don't know if you consider that an old-time hymnal, but if I was to consider another one that has always been a blessing to me, and it may mean more later on down the road, it is Well.
Yes.
I love that one as well. So.
Oh my goodness.
Those are two of my
yes, those are really good.
favorite.
I like, to me, old-fashioned Amazing Grace. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
Always gets me every time.
Yeah, I love that one as well. So go ahead, comment down below your favorite old time gospel hymn. Now, for those of you that have not watched the movie yet, you can go ahead and
Get out of here.
exit here. Just
Exit
go
now.
that way.
I'm
Or
warning
it
you.
actually would be that way. Press the red X wherever
Yeah,
it is.
wherever.
Maybe that way.
Listen, you have
So-
been warned.
Or
You
if
have
you
been
don't know
warned.
where the red X is, you're a little computer illiterate, you can press Alt F4. Or if you're on your fancy iPhone, swipe up. Just whatever you do, leave now because we're going to spoil the rest of your day.
Yeah.
So,
Bye,
all right,
guys.
they've left now. Thank you.
Yes,
All right,
they've
so now
left.
let's get into the Black Widow review.
Oh.
Right off the bat, I'm going to say, great movie. The only thing I see that I don't like, and if you want my honest review without even spoiling the movie, I just feel like the further and further we go along in Marvel movies, the more and more language they're starting to put in it.
Yes.
So-
This one does have language back
So-
to back to back. It was.
So, but it was a great movie. I thought it was interesting. I was kind of worried about where they were placing it because when I
Yeah.
first saw they were making a Black Widow movie, I thought it was actually going to go back to her time in Budapest.
That's
I
what I
thought that
thought
was going to
too.
be the story because it was always talked about,
Yeah, and we never actually got to see what that
which it wasn't.
was.
But I thought it was interesting, and I think they worked it out well.
They
where they
did.
placed it. Personally, I feel like the Taskmaster was
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Good, not
All right.
great, if that makes sense. Like, it was a good villain, but I don't think Taskmaster lived up to the villainy that it was supposed
Yeah,
to.
so if you're a Marvel comic nerd, you're probably going to be devastated with Taskmaster. The way they portrayed Taskmaster, who the person was, it was kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
It's for comic nerds. If you're like MCU, it's awesome because it's a callback to way back in the first Avengers movie when someone mentions somebody. But yeah, if you're a comic nerd, you're probably gonna be very
Yeah, it
devastated. I didn't like
But
Taskmaster.
I don't want to seem like I'm negative. The movie was really good.
It was.
It was good enough to where I was about to watch it a second time yesterday.
Yes.
But overall, I really liked the movie. I think that they did a good job in this movie, even though it was before Infinity War, technically.
A kind of a prequel.
I think they
yeah.
did a very good job of actually setting up movies post Endgame.
Yes.
So they, even though it,
definitely.
I don't know, it's one of those, where you're like mumbling, jumbling.
Yeah.
Even though it's pre-Avengers or
Pre-Infinity
pre-Infinity
War, yeah.
it still sets up post Endgame.
It does.
Which
It
is
actually does.
Very
Yeah.
good. So
So it is important to watch if you're trying to watch all the movies. It is important to watch.
So if you watch it down, you can comment down below. Just tell us what you think. Good, great.
I'll if I give a rating, I'll probably give it either a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. Wasn't
I
the
would
best Marvel
say
movie, but it was a good Marvel movie.
7 to 7.5. I don't think it was good enough to be an 8,
No, I don't think so
but
either.
I think it was good enough to be it was better than a 7, but not an 8. So
definitely
7.5
above
fair.
5. It was definitely above 5.
Yeah. So, now next week, next time we record, we're gonna have to definitely talk about Loki. So,
Oh.
so for you guys, it may be in 2 or 3 weeks, but so you have a couple
believe you
weeks to
just said
catch up. Loki, I watched episode 5, and I am watching episode 6.
It's been awesome.
I'm waking up Miss Jackie probably at 5 a.m. to watch that. So,
It's been great.
but we're going to go ahead and cut it off here, guys.
Cut off
Hopefully
now.
you guys enjoyed the episode.
Yes.
Hopefully you enjoyed our discussion about Black Widow. If you decided to watch it and you didn't watch the movie yet, hopefully we didn't ruin too much for you.
Hopefully.
But thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Teen Speak, and we will catch you in the next one.
Later, Gators.